Have you ever felt that the most important truths don't come from the world outside, but from the visions stirring deep within? You close your eyes, and suddenly images flash before you. A man pierced by an arrow, a bridge stretching across an endless chasm, a house lit from within, though no one is inside. Strange, yes, but meaningless? Not at all. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who shaped modern psychology, believed these images were far more than idle daydreams. To him, they were facts, psychic realities just as valid as the chair you're sitting on, the phone in your hand, or the city buzzing outside your window. What if your inner world is not a distraction, but a gateway? What if the images that rise uninvited, your fantasies, symbols, and sudden visions, are not random, but coded truths waiting to be understood? Imagine, for a moment, that every invention, every work of art, every bold act of history began as exactly that, a fantasy, a vision, a picture glimpsed in the mind long before it became something the world could touch. Jung would say, everything begins as fantasy. The walls around you, the device you're watching this on, even the chair you're sitting in, once they were nothing but images inside someone's mind. But here's the mystery. Most people dismiss these images. We're taught to trust only what we can measure, weigh, and prove. A fantasy. That's nothing, they say. But Jung turned that belief on its head. To him, fantasy was a form of energy. You can't measure it with a ruler or scale, but its power is undeniable. A single image has toppled empires. A dream has inspired revolutions. A vision has built cathedrals, painted masterpieces, and even led to scientific breakthroughs. The inner world has shaped the outer world more than we dare to admit. This is where we begin with a force Jung called introverted intuition. Unlike the senses which gather information from outside, what we see, hear, and touch, introverted intuition turns inward. It's not scanning the horizon for threats or opportunities. It's scanning the unconscious, pulling images out of the deep ocean of the psyche. And here's the paradox. These images are not physical, but to the intuitive type, they feel more real than the table in front of them. They carry weight, meaning direction. They whisper of possibilities before the facts ever arrive. But let me ask you this. What happens when a person starts to live guided by these images? What happens when someone treats fantasy not as escape, but as revelation? To the outside world, they may appear strange, aloof, maybe even lost in a dream. Society, especially in the modern West, glorifies the extrovert, the practical achiever, the man or woman who shows results in visible, tangible ways. To be lost in fantasy is almost a sin, and yet the intuitive introvert is not lost. They are listening to a different frequency. They are perceiving the hidden architecture of reality long before others can see it. This is why Jung described fantasy as fact. If someone has a fantasy of violence, that fantasy can shape behavior, influence choices, and even cost lives. If someone has a vision of creation, that vision can lead to inventions, movements, and works of beauty that alter history. Dismissing these inner realities is like ignoring the blueprint of a building and pretending the structure rose out of nowhere. But here's the catch. Introverted intuition is not easy to understand, even for the people who live with it. Those who carry this gift often struggle in silence. They see images that others would laugh at or call delusion. They experience insights that feel too bizarre to share, and so they stay quiet, misunderstood, dismissed. But inside, they are navigating a world as vast and complex as the one outside, perhaps even more so. And this is where the story turns fascinating, because while introverted intuition may look impractical or even detached, it holds a secret power, foresight, the ability to sense what's coming to perceive possibilities before they exist. Jung believed this gift is rooted in the collective unconscious, the deep layer of the psyche shared by all humanity, carrying the patterns and archetypes of every generation. When an intuitive introvert closes their eyes, they may glimpse symbols that are not just personal but universal. They may see the very patterns that shape culture, art, religion, and destiny itself. So let's ask again, are fantasies nothing, or are they the hidden blueprints of reality? If every great creation begins as an image, then fantasies are not illusions. They are the first sparks of existence. And if introverted intuition is the function that perceives them, then those who carry it are not dreamers to be dismissed, but visionaries holding keys to truths the rest of us can barely sense. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the strange, misunderstood world of introverted intuition. We'll see how it works, how it differs from other ways of perceiving, and why it often makes those who carry it feel like outcasts. We'll uncover its dangers, how it can pull a person too far from reality, and its gifts, from prophetic foresight to transformative creativity. Most importantly, we'll reveal why Jung believed this mysterious function was essential to the survival of humanity itself. Because here's the truth. The world you live in today was built first in the unseen realm of images, and if you want to understand where the world is going tomorrow, you have to look where few are willing to look: inside. So what exactly is introverted intuition? To understand it, we have to step into Jung's world. Jung didn't just divide people into introverts and extroverts. He went deeper, identifying functions, the ways people process reality. Some rely heavily on thinking, some on feeling. Others lean on sensation, which is all about what can be seen, touched, and measured. And then there's intuition. Now, when most people hear the word intuition, they think of a gut feeling, a quick hunch, or that sense that something is off. But Jung meant something far more profound. For him, intuition was perception through the unconscious. It wasn't about evidence, logic, or even sensory data. It was about images, symbols, and inner visions that rise up unbidden. And when intuition is introverted, turned inward, it stops looking at the outside world for possibilities. Instead, it dives into the inner object, the contents of the unconscious. Imagine your mind as a deep ocean. On the surface, you see waves, your thoughts, your conscious feelings, your daily awareness. But beneath that surface are vast, unseen currents, patterns, symbols, and images rising from the collective unconscious. Introverted intuition is like a diver plunging into that ocean, surfacing with images that seem mysterious, symbolic, sometimes even prophetic. Here's the key difference. For most people, a fantasy is just pretend, something to be brushed off as imaginary. But for the intuitive introvert, fantasy is fact. It's a psychic event. You can't weigh it like gold or measure it like distance, but it is just as real in terms of its effects. Jung gave a powerful example. A man has a fantasy, and that fantasy inspires him to build a bridge. Years later, thousands cross that bridge every day. The bridge itself is physical, but it started as a fantasy. The fantasy was the seed. This is why Jung insisted that fantasies and inner images have their own kind of reality. They are energetic facts. If you ignore them, you miss the forces shaping human history. If you pay attention, you see the hidden roots of everything we create. But let's bring it down from theory. What does this look like in real life? Picture someone sitting quietly, staring off into space. To the outside observer, they look distracted, maybe even lazy. But inside their mind, a vivid image is unfolding. A symbol, a vision, a strange dreamlike sequence. To them it feels as real as the room around them. That image may be cryptic. A man pierced by an arrow, a city on fire, a child holding a broken toy. but it carries meaning. The intuitive introvert doesn't just see the picture, they sense the weight behind it. This is the hallmark of introverted intuition, the ability to look past the surface of life and perceive the underlying images shaping it, where others see only what's in front of them. The knee type sees patterns, trajectories, and possibilities hidden beneath. They don't need 100 data points to sense what's coming. They see the image and know. Of course, this way of perceiving is not without its challenges. To someone rooted in sensation, the world of physical facts, it can sound insane. You saw what? A man pierced by an arrow. And that means what, exactly? To the sensation type, reality is about what you can verify. To the intuitive introvert, reality is also about what you can sense symbolically. And that clash often makes knee types feel like outsiders in a world that worships tangible evidence. But here's what makes introverted intuition so fascinating. It doesn't just create fantasies for escape. It creates fantasies that reveal. These images often expose truths buried deep in the unconscious, truths about emotions, conflicts, or possibilities not yet realized. They don't just entertain, they guide. Think of the intuitive introvert as someone holding a lantern in a dark cave. Others stumble blindly, relying on their senses, bumping into walls, feeling their way forward inch by inch. But the niece type sees flickers of light ahead. They glimpse shapes in the dark long before anyone else. They can't always explain how they know, and often their explanations sound strange, fragmented, or cryptic. But later, when events unfold, people look back and realize they saw it coming. And yet, for all its mystery, introverted intuition is not magic. It's a function of the psyche, a way of processing reality. Jung described it simply as perception via the unconscious. Just as sensation tells us about the texture of a rock or the sound of a bell, intuition tells us about the symbolic image hiding behind those experiences. Both are real, both are valid, but society tends to trust one and dismiss the other. Which brings us to the next problem. What happens when introverted intuition collides with sensation, the function that trusts only what is seen, touched, and measured? This clash isn't just theoretical. It plays out in real life in how people perceive illness, emotions, and meaning. And understanding that difference is the key to seeing why introverted intuition often feels so misunderstood. To really grasp the strange power of introverted intuition, you need to see how it stands in direct contrast to another function, sensation. Sensation is grounded, practical, and rooted in the here and now. It's about what can be seen, touched, tasted, measured, and verified. If intuition is a lantern flickering in the dark, sensation is a flashlight fixed firmly on what's directly in front of you. Let's use a simple example. Imagine someone suffers from dizziness, what Jung called psychogenic vertigo, meaning the dizziness doesn't come from a physical condition, but from the psyche itself. A sensation type approaches it like this. How strong is the dizziness? When does it happen? How long does it last? They want the details, the intensity, the frequency, the measurable facts. To them, reality is about what you can record with precision. They are scientists, doctors, realists. They want proof. But intuition takes an entirely different route. The intuitive doesn't stop at the physical sensation. Instead, they ask, what's behind this? What image is trying to emerge? What symbolic picture lies hidden in this experience? Where sensation measures the dizziness, intuition searches for its meaning. And what does intuition often uncover? Not numbers, not measurements, but images. Jung described how an intuitive person might see in their mind's eye a tottering man pierced through the heart by an arrow. Now, to a sensation type, this sounds absurd. What does an arrow-pierced man have to do with vertigo? But to the intuitive, that image speaks volumes. It symbolizes inner conflict, emotional turmoil, or some unresolved tension in the unconscious that is manifesting physically. This is the divide. Sensation clings to the surface. Intuition dives for the depths. Sensation is about what is, the immediate, the concrete. Intuition is about what lies beneath, the hidden, the symbolic, the yet to emerge. And here's where it gets tricky. Both are real, but they rarely agree. Sensation says, the dizziness lasted 30 seconds. Intuition says, the dizziness is the body's way of showing you a symbolic truth. Both are facts, but they belong to different dimensions of reality. This is why Jung insisted that fantasies and unconscious images are not nothing. They are events, just like physical sensations. You can't weigh them on a scale, but you can't deny their effects either. A single inner image can shift how a person lives, how they see themselves, how they treat others. It can spark a decision that alters a life's course, and yet to the sensation type, this seems like nonsense, mere imagination. But here's the twist. Ignore these images at your peril. History shows that fantasies and visions have led to revolutions, inventions, and movements that reshaped entire societies. Sensation might keep you grounded in the present, but intuition pushes you toward the future, toward what's not yet visible, but is already forming in the unconscious. Now, let's step back. Why does this matter? Because our world heavily rewards sensation. Science, technology, business, all of them rely on proof, evidence, and data. And that's valuable, no doubt. But when a society glorifies sensation alone, it dismisses intuition as worthless fantasy. That dismissal doesn't erase intuition. It only drives it underground, making intuitive types feel isolated, misunderstood, or even ashamed of their inner world. Imagine you're an introverted intuitive, trying to share your vision. You say, I keep seeing this image of collapse, like a tower falling. To you, it feels urgent, meaningful, maybe even prophetic. But to the sensation type, it's laughable. They demand proof. Where's your data? Where's your evidence? And so the intuitive introvert learns to stay quiet, to keep their visions private. They carry entire worlds within them, but they share little because they know most people won't understand. This silence is both their protection and their curse. Protection, because it shields them from ridicule. Curse, because it leaves them isolated, unable to fully express what they sense. And yet, despite this divide, there's a strange balance here. Jung pointed out that sensation and intuition are opposites. They counterbalance each other. Too much sensation without intuition, and you get a society obsessed with facts but blind to meaning. Too much intuition without sensation, and you get a dreamer lost in visions, unable to plant their feet on solid ground. Both are needed. Both are real. But here's the part that makes introverted intuition so fascinating. While sensation captures the details of what exists, intuition leaps ahead to what's possible. Sensation says, here is the stone. Intuition says, this stone is the foundation of a cathedral not yet built. Sensation says, the arrow pierced the man. Intuition says, this arrow is a symbol of the hidden conflict breaking his heart. One stays in the present, the other peers into the future, or into the soul. And this is why introverted intuition so often feels misunderstood. It doesn't play by the rules of the tangible world. It doesn't explain itself in neat, linear logic. Instead, it speaks in images, symbols, and visions. And unless you've experienced it yourself, it can sound strange, cryptic, even absurd. But here's the thing. Strangeness doesn't mean false. Often, what begins as the strangest fantasy becomes tomorrow's reality. And those who can see it before it arrives, the introverted intuitives, carry a gift even if the world doesn't recognize it. Which raises a pressing question. What happens when society dismisses these people, when it labels them as aloof, impractical, or lost in dreams? That's where we turn next, because the story of introverted intuition isn't just about how it works, it's about how misunderstood it truly is. Picture this. A person sits quietly in the corner of a crowded room. They aren't chiming in with jokes. They aren't telling stories. They aren't glued to their phone. Instead, their eyes drift somewhere far away, as if they're watching a movie that no one else can see. To the casual observer, they look distracted, maybe even cold or disinterested. But inside their mind, entire worlds are unfolding. This is the life of the introverted intuitive, someone whose attention is pulled not to the noise outside, but to the images within. And here's the problem. Society rarely understands it. We live in a culture that rewards what is visible: productivity, chatter, activity, proof. The person who speaks the loudest often seems the most confident. The one who shows the most results, the most measurable success, is considered the most valuable. In a world like that, what chance does someone have whose greatest power lies in visions, fantasies, and symbolic perceptions? To the extroverted majority, fantasies are dismissed as nothing. They're just imagination. They're not real. But to the introverted intuitive, those fantasies are the very bedrock of reality. They are facts of the psyche, carrying weight and energy. They're not games. They're glimpses into the hidden order of life. And this mismatch creates one of the deepest pains for types, the sense of being perpetually misunderstood. When they try to share their visions, they're often met with blank stares, laughter, or outright dismissal. That doesn't make sense. You're overthinking. That's crazy talk. Slowly, the intuitive introvert learns to keep silent. They tuck their visions away like fragile treasures no one else can handle. But that silence comes at a cost. When you can't share the images that shape your inner world, you begin to feel isolated, detached, as if you're living in a parallel reality no one else has access to. You see patterns unfolding in people's lives, but they don't believe you. You sense the storm before the clouds form, but no one listens. Over time, that can make the intuitive introvert retreat even further into themselves, convinced that their world is too strange for others to understand. Jung himself recognized this. He wrote that the introverted intuitive often lives a very difficult life. Although one of the most interesting lives. Why difficult? Because the external world doesn't validate their inner reality. Why interesting? Because the images they perceive are endlessly fascinating, symbolic, and rich with meaning. Take this in: an introverted intuitive can walk into a situation and instantly sense the deeper story playing out beneath the surface. They don't just see a couple arguing. They sense the archetypal patterns of betrayal, fear, or longing woven into it. They don't just see a politician speaking. They perceive the unconscious forces that will shape how the public reacts months later. But if they try to explain what they see, it rarely lands. Others think they're speaking in riddles, or worse, nonsense. This is why many archetypes appear guarded. They rarely reveal their true visions, because they know how strange those visions sound when spoken aloud. They protect themselves by staying vague, by speaking only in fragments, or by saying nothing at all. It's not that they don't want to connect, it's that connection feels dangerous when misunderstanding is almost guaranteed. And yet, here's the paradox: what makes them feel misunderstood is also what makes them invaluable. Because while society races after the visible, the tangible, the immediately useful, the introverted intuitive is quietly holding the blueprints of tomorrow. They're the ones who sense the hidden forces shaping the future long before the rest of us catch up. But in the meantime, they pay the price of being labeled aloof, strange, even dreamy. They might be called impractical because they don't obsess over details. They might be judged as detached because they seem more invested in inner images than in outer appearances. To others, they can look lost, but they're not lost. They're navigating a different kind of reality, one that doesn't always translate neatly into words. Think about it. How do you describe an image that feels more real than the object in front of you? How do you explain a vision that makes no sense until months or years later when reality finally catches up? This is why introverted intuitives so often carry their insights quietly, waiting for the day when the world can see what they've already glimpsed. And that day does come, again and again throughout history. People once ridiculed for their visions are later celebrated as visionaries. Artists, prophets, inventors, they often walked through life misunderstood, only for their fantasies to one day reshape culture. The same pattern plays out on a smaller scale for every me type. Their images may not always change the world, but they change the course of their own lives and the lives of those close to them. So the next time you see someone staring off into space, don't be so quick to assume they're disconnected. They may be more connected than anyone else in the room, just not to the outer noise. They're connected to the symbolic flow that whispers truths beneath the surface. And here's the real kicker. Being misunderstood is only half the story. Because introverted intuition isn't just about seeing inner images, it's about glimpsing what's coming. And when those visions connect to the collective unconscious, they don't just explain the present, they predict the future. Which takes us straight into the next part of our journey, the prophetic power of introverted intuition and its strange connection to archetypes. If you've ever met a true introverted intuitive, you may have felt it, that eerie sense that they can see what's coming before anyone else does. They don't need a spreadsheet of data points or a long history of evidence. They just know. And later, when the event unfolds exactly as they sensed, people call it a lucky guess, a coincidence, or even superstition. But Carl Jung believed there was much more going on. At the core of this mystery is the concept of archetypes, the universal patterns buried deep within the human psyche. Archetypes are like the DNA of the unconscious. They're inherited blueprints that shape the way humans across all times and cultures perceive life. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the shadow. These archetypes live in the collective unconscious, the vast shared layer of the psyche that Jung said connects every person to every other person. Introverted intuition, more than any other function, has direct access to these archetypes. When NIN types close their eyes, the images that surface aren't just random daydreams, they're expressions of these deep, inherited patterns. That's why their visions often feel so big, larger than personal, almost cosmic. They're not just tapping into their own unconscious, they're brushing against the universal currents of human experience. Here's where it gets fascinating. When a me type describes their vision, it often sounds prophetic, not because they're fortune tellers, but because archetypes carry with them trajectories. They don't just represent what is, they hint at what's likely to come next. Think of it this way. If you know the pattern of a storm cloud, you can sense when a thunderstorm is brewing even before you hear thunder. In the same way, if you see an archetype stirring in the unconscious, you can sense the events it might trigger long before they arrive. Jung compared this to the philosopher Immanuel Kant's idea of the noumenon, the thing in itself, the reality that exists beyond what we can directly perceive. We never see the noumenon directly. We only glimpse it through the shapes it casts into our senses. For Jung, archetypes were like that. They were the noumenal patterns that intuition could perceive, not through logic or measurement, but through images, symbols, and visions. This is why introverted intuition so often feels prophetic. When a knee type sees an image, say a crumbling tower or a river swelling over its banks, they may not know immediately what it means, but they sense its weight, its inevitability. Later, when a company collapses, or when emotions overflow in a relationship, the image suddenly makes sense. The tower was never just a tower. The river was never just a river. These were archetypal symbols expressing truths the conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. But here's the challenge to others. This looks like guesswork at best, nonsense at worst. How can you explain to someone that the vision you saw in a dream speaks to events that haven't happened yet? To the sensation type, this is incomprehensible. They demand proof, timelines, hard evidence, and intuition rarely offers that. It offers images that make sense only in hindsight. Yet history is full of people who trusted these images and reshaped the world because of it. Think of inventors who dreamed solutions before they engineered them, artists who painted visions no one understood until decades later, prophets who spoke cryptic words that made sense only after events unfolded. In each case, they were tapping into something larger than themselves, archetypes whispering through the collective unconscious. This is why Jung sometimes described introverted intuitives as seers, not because they possessed supernatural powers, but because they had an uncanny sensitivity to the symbolic undercurrents shaping human life. They could sense what was forming in the unconscious before it broke the surface. But let's be clear, this gift is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it gives knee types a powerful edge. They can anticipate change, foresee trends, and grasp the hidden meaning of events long before others do. On the other hand, it isolates them, because unless the world is ready to hear their vision, they risk being ridiculed, dismissed, or ignored. And here's the cruel irony. Sometimes their visions are so ahead of their time that recognition doesn't come until after they're gone. The world finally catches up, but too late for the seer to feel understood. Still, the power of archetypes cannot be overstated. They shape religions, myths, and art. They drive politics, movements, and revolutions. And introverted intuition, more than any other function, is tuned to their frequency. To live with knee dominant is to live with one foot in the present and one foot in the timeless. It's to see not only what is, but also the shadows of what's coming. So the question is, how does this prophetic power play out in everyday life? What strengths does it give, and what weaknesses? Because while the gift of knee can illuminate, it can also overwhelm, pulling a person so deeply into visions that they lose touch with the physical world around them. And that's exactly where we're heading next. The double-edged sword of introverted intuition, its brilliance and its dangers. Every gift has a shadow, and for the introverted intuitive, the very function that allows them to see hidden truths also makes life complicated, lonely, and sometimes painfully detached from reality. On one hand, introverted intuition is a compass pointing toward what others can't see. It allows someone to sense underlying patterns, glimpse symbolic truths, and even anticipate events long before they occur. But on the other hand, it can alienate them from the present, from the body, and from the world of practical details.
This is the double-edged sword of Nick.
Let's start with its strengths. Knee-dominant individuals have a vision-driven way of living. While others focus on the here and now, they're drawn to what lies beneath and beyond. They often become inventors, visionaries, artists, and spiritual seekers, because they're not satisfied with surface-level reality. They see the hidden currents shaping human existence, and they follow those currents relentlessly. This gives them a kind of foresight that can feel almost supernatural. They walk into a room, and sense dynamics others miss.
They watch a movement begin and intuit where it's heading.
They feel a change in their own psyche and perceive its deeper meaning before anyone else notices. This makes them extraordinary strategists, creators, and guides. Their visions often become the seeds of innovation and transformation. But the sword cuts both ways. That same vision-driven focus can pull them away from reality. While they're busy chasing images, exploring archetypes, or losing themselves in inner symbols, they can neglect the very basics of daily life. Paying bills, keeping appointments, maintaining routines. These things may feel unbearably trivial compared to the grandeur of the inner world. The result? Missed opportunities, disorganization, and a sense of being out of sync with practical demands. Jung himself noted this tendency. He observed that introverted intuitives often lack awareness of their bodily existence. Their focus is so turned inward that they ignore their own health or dismiss their physical needs. They might live in their heads, feeding on images, while their body quietly struggles. This imbalance often produces exaggerated sensitivity to physical symptoms, what Jung called hypochondria. It's not that they're imagining sickness, it's that their repressed sensory function bursts out in distorted ways, magnifying every ache and discomfort. Here's an example. An I type might spend hours immersed in visions or symbolic analysis, only to suddenly feel overwhelmed by a sharp awareness of their heartbeat or a twitch in their muscles. Because they've neglected sensation, when it does erupt, it comes in archaic, almost primal form. Obsessive, exaggerated, sometimes irrational. It's as though the body demands to be heard after being ignored for too long. And the dangers don't stop there. The inner world of introverted intuition can become so compelling that the outer world begins to lose its grip. Jung warned that when Ni takes complete dominance, it can produce a mystical dreamer or even a crank, a person lost in visions that no longer connect to reality. They may believe their fantasies are absolute truth, refusing to ground them in action or logic. At best, this produces the eccentric artist. At worst, it can lead to total detachment from the real world. Think of it like this. Ni provides visions, but without balance, those visions become an addiction. The intuitive becomes so fascinated by symbols and archetypes that they chase them endlessly, never anchoring them in practical life. They move from image to image, from dream to dream, without ever building a bridge between the inner world and the outer one. And yet, this shadow side also points to the function's unique brilliance, because the truth is, not every vision needs to be practical. Some visions exist to inspire, to provoke, to awaken. The artist who paints surreal dreamscapes may never balance their checkbook, but their work opens a window into the unconscious that others could never access. The philosopher, who seems aloof and impractical, may write words that shape thought for centuries. So the double-edged sword is this introverted intuition, both alienates and elevates. It makes life harder for the individual, while making their contributions richer for the world. It robs them of ease in the moment, while gifting them with insight into eternity. But this tension doesn't come without cost. Ni types often feel torn between their inner life and outer obligations. They crave meaning and symbolic depth, but reality demands bills be paid, relationships be maintained, and responsibilities be met. When they lean too far into visions, they're judged as flaky or detached. When they force themselves into practicality, they feel suffocated, starved of the symbolic richness they need to survive. And here lies their lifelong challenge to integrate, to find a way of balancing vision with action, intuition with sensation. Without this balance, they risk burning out or spiraling into detachment. With it, they become extraordinary visionaries, people who not only see the hidden truths, but also bring them into the world in ways others can grasp. This balancing act is never easy. It requires constant effort, humility, and often painful self-awareness. But for those who succeed, the result is powerful. A life where visions don't just float in the unconscious, but take form in art, ideas, or movements that shape the visible world. Still, before that integration can happen, something else has to be understood: the symbolic power of dreams. Because in dreams, the unconscious reveals itself in its rawest form. And for introverted intuitives, dreams often provide the most vivid, bewildering, and transformative images of all. And that's where we turn next: the strange world of dreams and symbolic battles that reveal the unconscious conflicts driving introverted intuition. If introverted intuition is a lantern in the darkness, then dreams are the stage where its light burns brightest. For Jung, dreams weren't random static from the brain. They were living communications from the unconscious. And for the intuitive introvert, those communications often arrive in the form of dramatic, symbolic battles. Think about the dreams you've had that never left you. Maybe you saw animals fighting in the forest. Maybe a giant wave swallowed the city. Maybe you stood face to face with a stranger who felt strangely familiar. To the logical mind, these seem bizarre, meaningless, even absurd. But to the introverted intuitive, these are messages-coded dramas revealing truths hidden beneath waking life. Jung described this vividly. He observed that the unconscious, when neglected, doesn't vanish. It pushes back, and when it does, it often takes on archaic, instinctual forms. That's why so many dreams feature animals, monsters, or battles between primal forces. These aren't just fantasies. They're the psyche trying to reconcile opposing energies within. For example, an E-type struggling with inner conflict may dream of two beasts locked in combat, one ferocious and untamed, the other calm but unyielding. To the sensation type, this is just a weird dream. To the intuitive, it's a symbol of the war raging in their unconscious, perhaps a conflict between desire and duty, between instinct and morality. The dream dramatizes what can't yet be expressed in conscious thought. And here's the key: these dream images are not optional. They are psychic facts, just as real to the intuitive as waking events. You may not be able to weigh a dream on a scale, but you can't deny its impact. It shapes mood, behavior, and choices. It lingers, haunting or inspiring, long after the body wakes. This is why introverted intuitives often live with a heightened awareness of symbolism. They don't just dream of a wave, they feel it as a surge of unconscious energy threatening to flood their waking life. They don't just dream of a stranger, they sense it's an archetype stepping forward from the collective unconscious. For them, the dream is not entertainment, it's revelation. But here's the challenge: these revelations rarely translate neatly into language. Dreams communicate in images, not in logical sentences. So when an E-type tries to share their dream, it can sound fragmented, cryptic, or even nonsensical. I saw a bird with broken wings turning into a child, they might say, and people shrug. But to the intuitive, that dream may represent a profound inner transformation, the loss of freedom, giving birth to vulnerability and growth. This is why E-types often guard their dreams closely. They know that most people won't understand. Worse, they fear being dismissed, ridiculed, or pathologized. So instead of explaining, they turn inward, interpreting their symbols alone. That solitude is both empowering and isolating. Jung himself said that to ignore dreams is to ignore half of life, and he went further. He insisted that analyzing dreams could reveal the power that makes you think like that, the unconscious source driving not only your dreams but also your waking thoughts. For the introverted intuitive, this is daily reality. They don't wait for dreams to be analyzed in therapy. They're analyzing them constantly, weaving symbols into a tapestry of meaning that shapes their worldview. And sometimes, these symbols don't just explain the present, they anticipate the future. A night type may dream of collapse, only to watch a relationship or business unravel months later. They may dream of a new beginning, only to stumble into an unexpected opportunity soon after. To them, this isn't coincidence. It's the unconscious foreshadowing what consciousness has yet to realize. But again, this is the double bind. Their visions feel true, but they can't easily prove them. Dreams may reveal archetypal truths, but unless others share that sensitivity, it looks like fantasy. So once again, the intuitive is left holding images no one else values, images that may be priceless if only they could be understood. Still, this dream world is essential to their growth. It keeps them in touch with the deeper layers of the psyche. It forces them to confront inner conflicts that might otherwise remain buried. And in doing so, it fuels their creativity, their insight, and their prophetic edge. Yet it also exposes their vulnerability, because when your life is shaped by dream symbols, you risk drifting too far from tangible reality. You risk living more in images than in the present moment. And while those images can be rich and transformative, they can also leave you feeling detached, misunderstood, and even alienated from the world around you. So what does a knee type do with this? How do they transform symbolic dreams into something more than private dramas? The answer lies in meaning. When the intuitive doesn't just perceive symbols but asks, what do these visions mean for me? What task do they present? That's when the dream becomes not just revelation, but direction. And that's where our journey now leads. The moment when introverted intuition shifts from pure perception to moral engagement. When visions stop being fragments of fantasy and start becoming guiding lights for life itself. Up to this point, we've seen how introverted intuition thrives on images, symbols, and archetypes. It perceives what others overlook. It dives into dreams, explores unconscious patterns, and glimpses possibilities before they surface in the outer world. But perception alone isn't enough. The question every knee type eventually faces is this: what do these visions mean for me? This is where the journey changes, because pure intuition, left unchecked, can become a carousel of endless images, fascinating but fruitless. Jung himself observed that the pure intuitive type often represses judgment, focusing only on what they see but not what it demands of them. They drift from vision to vision without anchoring any of it in purpose. And while that can make them mystical dreamers or eccentric artists, it can also leave them trapped in detachment, unable to connect their inner life to outer reality. But when judgment enters the picture, when the intuitive asks, "What is this vision calling me to do?" everything changes. Suddenly, the image isn't just a curiosity, it's a message. It carries responsibility. It presents a task. For example, imagine an introverted intuitive who dreams of a house consumed by fire. At first, it may simply fascinate them. The colors, the destruction, the drama of it all. But if they pause to ask, what does this mean for me? They might realize the dream reflects their current life. Maybe they're burning themselves out at work. Maybe a relationship is collapsing under hidden tension. The dream becomes not just symbolic, but directive. It urges action. This is the difference between drifting in visions and living by them. The first is aesthetic. The intuitive marvels at the imagery, but remains unchanged. The second is transformative. The intuitive lets the imagery reshape their choices, values, and direction. And here's the beauty. When introverted intuition makes this leap, it often produces profound creativity and wisdom. The visionary artist channels inner images into paintings, novels, or films that move others deeply. The philosopher interprets symbols into systems of thought that reshape culture, The spiritual seeker translates visions into practices that guide communities. The same function that once seemed detached now becomes a bridge, connecting the unconscious to conscious life. But this process isn't easy. The introverted intuitive must wrestle with the meaning of their visions, and that can be unsettling. Symbols rarely deliver neat answers. They provoke, challenge, and unsettle. They often reveal truths the conscious mind doesn't want to face. To ask, "What does this mean for me?" is to risk confronting uncomfortable realities. Take Jung's example of the man pierced by an arrow. For the sensation type, this is nonsense. For the intuitive, it's an image rich with meaning, perhaps pointing to betrayal, heartbreak, or unhealed wounds. But to apply that meaning requires courage. It may demand admitting pain, changing behavior, or reevaluating relationships. And that's why many Nini types hesitate. It's easier to admire the vision than to live by it. Still, when they do take that step, something extraordinary happens. Their visions stop being private fantasies and start becoming public contributions. The artist who paints archetypal dreams gives others a mirror to their own unconscious. The leader who senses the future trajectory of events can prepare others for what's coming. The individual who interprets their visions personally can live with clarity and authenticity that inspires those around them. This is why Jung emphasized that intuition, when morally oriented, is not just about seeing, it's about participating. The intuitive feels that the vision wants to be part of their life, that it demands to be expressed in action, creation, or change. In this sense, introverted intuition becomes less about detachment and more about destiny. But here's the trap. Many Ni types get stuck in the in-between. They sense the weight of their visions, but resist acting on them. They hoard images without translating them into meaning. This can leave them fragmented, ungrounded, and unfulfilled. It can also make them seem enigmatic or confusing to others, because their words don't match their lives. They speak in symbols but fail to embody them. And yet, those who cross the threshold, who embrace their visions as calls to action, often become the very visionaries the world needs. They are the ones who not only see the patterns, but also illuminate them for others. They are the prophets, the artists, the philosophers, and the innovators whose lives bridge the unseen and the seen. So the question for every intuitive introvert is this: will you let your visions remain private spectacles, or will you take on the responsibility of meaning? Because once you do, your fantasies cease to be just fantasies. They become the seeds of transformation, first for yourself, then for others. But even this is not the end of the story, because as powerful as Neti is, society often fails to value it. Its contributions are subtle, symbolic, and often misunderstood, which means the intuitive introvert not only wrestles with their own visions, they also wrestle with a world that dismisses them. And that leads us to the final part of our journey: the hidden value of introverted intuition and why Jung believed it was essential, not optional, for the survival of civilization itself. We've walked through the strange, symbolic corridors of introverted intuition, its fantasies, its archetypes, its dreams, its struggles, and its revelations. But now we have to ask the question that lingers over everything: why does this matter? Why should anyone care about a function so misunderstood, so often dismissed as impractical fantasy? The answer is both simple and profound, because without introverted intuition, humanity loses touch with its future. Think about it. Every invention, every revolution, every cultural transformation begins first as an image in someone's mind. Long before the Wright brothers flew, they dreamed of flight. Long before Gandhi led India to independence, he envisioned a nation free of oppression. Long before Einstein formulated relativity, He imagined riding on a beam of light. These were not sensory facts. They were visions, fantasies, if you like, perceived with the same kind of symbolic clarity that introverted intuition specializes in. Society may glorify what can be measured and weighed, but the truth is, the visible world rests on an invisible foundation of images. The skyscraper began as a sketch. The smartphone began as a dream. The great works of art, the movements of philosophy, the revolutions of politics, all were once fantasies whispered in the minds of individuals who dared to trust their inner visions. This is why Jung warned against dismissing fantasy as nothing. To him, fantasy was not only fact, it was energy, a living force. Ignore it, and you cut yourself off from the very source of creation. Embrace it, and you tap into the power that builds worlds. For introverted intuitives, this is their everyday reality. They live in the realm where those fantasies form. They carry images that feel weighty, urgent, and alive, even when no one else can see them. And while they may be misunderstood, labeled aloof, impractical, or eccentric, the truth is that their visions often hold the seeds of tomorrow's reality. But here's the tragedy. Society rarely values them in the moment. Extroversion dominates, especially in cultures like America, where success is measured in visibility, activity, and proof. The me type staring off into inner space seems irrelevant in such a world. Their gift is subtle, symbolic, and slow to prove itself, and so they are dismissed, undervalued, or ignored. Yet history tells us this dismissal is short-sighted. Again and again, visionaries are ridiculed before they are revered. Jung himself was criticized for his emphasis on the unconscious, his exploration of archetypes, his insistence that dreams matter. But decades later, his insights continue to shape psychology, spirituality, and art. What seemed eccentric in his time became foundational in ours. And that is the hidden value of introverted intuition. It is not always practical in the moment. It is not always efficient, but it keeps humanity tethered to the unseen depths from which all creativity flows. Without it, we risk becoming a civilization obsessed only with surfaces, facts without meaning, activity without vision, progress without direction. This is why Jung described me types as difficult but essential. They may live misunderstood lives, carrying images too strange for ordinary conversation. They may feel isolated, disconnected, even alienated from the world around them. But their very existence proves a vital truth that life is not only what we see, but also what we sense within. And for those willing to listen, their visions can be life-changing. The image of a collapsing tower may warn of the fragility of our systems. The dream of a river overflowing may reveal emotions we've buried too long. The archetype of the hero, the shadow, or the wise old man may guide us through crises we cannot navigate with reason alone. These are not just private fantasies. They are universal messages translated through the lens of a single psyche, but meant for all of us. So the next time someone tells you fantasies are nothing, remember this: everything you see around you was once fantasy. Every invention, every piece of art, every system of thought. What begins as vision becomes reality, and those who carry visions, introverted intuitives, are the guardians of that process. Of course, this doesn't mean they have it easy. Their challenge will always be integration, balancing their inner visions with outer realities, grounding fantasy in action, translating symbols into meaning. Without that balance, they risk drifting into isolation, but with it, they become extraordinary. They become the seers, the artists, the philosophers, the guides who remind us that life is not just matter and motion, but also meaning and mystery. Carl Jung once said, "Intuition is perception via the unconscious." It may sound vague, but behind it lies the essence of me, the ability to perceive truths that exist before the senses can catch up, to glimpse possibilities not yet visible, to listen to the whispers of the collective unconscious shaping all of us. And so we return to the question we began with: are fantasies nothing? The answer is clear. Fantasies are not illusions. They are the blueprints of existence. They are the sparks that light civilizations. They are the hidden reality that introverted intuitives live with every day. Their world may be misunderstood. Their visions may be mocked, but their gift is nothing less than the power to see the unseen, and in seeing it, to shape the world we will one day inhabit.